Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here with a portal update on the Spartans. Before we begin, I have an announcement. Rod and I will be hosting an in-person dinner at some point this summer. We have not yet figured out the date or the venue. Except that it'll be summer, but we'll figure that out just to our loyal supporters. So if you want to support the show, or if you are currently supporting the show at the Patreon Draymond Green level or higher, which is $10 a month, or on Substack, you will get an email invite. So make sure you check your email for time. I will tell you once the invites have gone out as well. And so that'll have the details whenever we figure out the venue and timing, and that'll give us an idea for attendance. Imagine at this point it's going to be somewhere in the Lansing area. I think preferably East Lansing, maybe pizza. Not quite sure. We'll have to kind of figure that out, like I said. So again, watch your invites for that. That'll come out sometime by the end of spring, I hope. So there's still time to sign up if you want to up your support or start supporting the show. You can certainly do that. Go on Patreon or Substack. You can find that at thefinalfoursnottheschedule.com/support. All right, let's get to the show, Rod. It is now officially roster season now that the NCAA is done. And I think a quarter of half the college basketball players seem to be in the portal. So the portal doesn't close, I think, until the end of this month, April 30th or whenever, May 1st.
Right.
So there's a lot going on. Now, once people are in the portal, they can come back. They can leave the portal and go back to where they started. They can not get a roster spot. Their spot could be gone. And it does not close until, I don't even know when it does close. Like officially, is it like end of summer sort of, or are you kind of always in the portal until you leave?
It would be, registration deadlines for a particular school.
For school,
right?
Yeah. Okay.
So, but you're right that the general thrust of what you were saying, that the deadline for entry is May 1st. There is no formal deadline for commitment, and there will be guaranteed recruitments that go on all summer. There will definitely be recruitments that go on at least through the bulk of May, because the deadline for withdrawing the name for the NBA draft is, I can't remember the exact date because, boy, it seems less important than it used to.
For sure.
But it's in late May. You remember how that was the big thing?
Yeah, that was big.
Guys going in Tesla Waters. You don't hear that very much anymore.
No, you hardly know what happens.
Now, it does, but the activity is really on this front. It's on the transfer front. And, of course, guys can be entertaining both simultaneously, and many do.
Yeah.
Many of the guys who have entered the draft have also entered the portal to preserve their right if they decide to come back. So anyway, yeah, all of that's true. It's a busy time right now, and Tom Izzo has been alluding to that.
Yeah.
He did so today, as a matter of fact.
Well, and we're certainly not going to, and by today, it's April 17th as we're recording.
Right.
Things change so fast. It's so fluid. And I think, the one thing I want to point out right now is we're not going to be discussing the rules of the portal in the sense that, what it should be, how it's going to turn out. And then we're going to have plenty of discussions later this summer with other people and with each other. But I think we're just going to stick to just what's going on in the portal right now with Michigan State. So there are portals in, there are portal outs. And so let's start with the outs for Michigan State, namely Mady Sissoko and A.J. Hoggard, who are the notable ones who have a year of eligibility remaining with COVID.
Yeah, and so I alluded to a moment ago, Tom Izzo did an appearance on Tim Stout's radio show in East Lansing this afternoon, and he spoke to both of those. So we'll start with A.J. he verified what has been known by most people, I think, who are paying attention to this, that AJ is done at Michigan State. He has entered the NBA draft. He could theoretically return to school. But what Izzo said was he thinks he's more oriented toward moving on to a professional life, but he would have the option of coming back for COVID year. If he does that, it isn't going to be at Michigan State.
Right. Yeah.
Now I have heard, and I can't remember whether I've mentioned this here before or not, but I was told this, it's probably 2-3 weeks ago now, by somebody who I respect, who I know knows what's going on in a general sense around the basketball program, that Hoggard had expressed an interest in returning, and Michigan State did not share that interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this announcement today kind of confirms that, because AJ has not entered the portal as of yet.
Right.
I would be surprised if he doesn't before the end of the month, just to give himself an option. And frankly, I think if he does, he'll be in high demand. I mean, I'm not suggesting that there's no market for AJ Hoggard, for a guy who's mostly a 3-year starter, has the high points are very high. You make an all-region team in the NCAA tournament, you've done something good. He's been an honorable mention All Big Ten player as well. It's not like this is a guy who's, a 2-point-a-game scorer. But Izzo went on in the discussion today to confirm, he started talking. There was a quote, and I want to read the quote because, and the quote comes from Jim Comparoni's article, which I will, at Spartan Mag, which I will refer back to as we move through today's episode. But I want to make sure I get this right because it was important. It was about the point guard position. He mentioned that, here we go. I'm excited about our team, Izzo said. And again, this is from the Stout Show. At the point, I think people are going to be surprised. When you get a quarterback, things fall into place.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Well, it tells you, and there has been, to some extent in social media, definitely on Jim Comparoni's Spartan Mag board, there's been a debate from certain, I guess I should just say people,
corners,
and not be pejorative.
Yeah.
Though I would like to, and I think it's merited, but who want to push back against the notion that Michigan State's issues this year, the reason they underachieved, a lot of it was down to guard play, specifically point guard play. If you don't understand what Tom Izzo was telling you in that quote I just read, you can't be helped. You can think he's wrong too. But what I'm saying is what we spent a lot of time talking about for the last 5-6 months is an opinion that is in a very specific sense shared by the guy who runs the program. Not a surprise to me, because I think if you understand the sport, you saw it, and I don't understand how you couldn't see it if you purport to understand the sport. But regardless, what he's also saying is he thinks better times are ahead.
Yeah, and
I agree with that as well, because I think Jeremy Fears is going to be a problem, not for Michigan State, for opponent.
Yeah.
And what he's, to take it one more step and then I'll stop, what he's saying there is the same thing that we've been getting at for all of this time. Point guard is critical no matter what level of the game you're talking about. It is even more critical in a program like Michigan State because Tom Izzo put so much, honestly, more than some other places do, on his point guard shoulders. And if that guy is at the level of play that Michigan State's had most of the time during the Izzo era, that guy is capable not just of doing things well himself, but of making those around him better than they would otherwise be. That's the magic in that position. When it's being played really well, other guys are better as a result. And I think that's what Jeremy Fears is, and I think that's what he's getting at when he says when you get a quarterback, things fall into place. That's what he means.
Yeah, right.
We'll see if he's right. I think he's going to be right, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think the other, I guess, unsaid part of that quote as well is that he believes Jeremy Fears is going to be fine. I mean, I think
that's true. Absolutely.
Right.
And he has been talking explicitly about it and using his name during this still young off season. So I think you're absolutely right. They don't seem to have major concerns.
All right. Well, that was the unsurprising part. I think, the other thing that maybe was the last time we spoke about the portal, we mentioned Mady Sissoko had entered the portal.
Yeah.
We both thought he might stick around or have interest in sticking around at Michigan State. And he has been exploring a lot of places. And so what are the updates on him?
Yeah. And I still wouldn't, Izzo seemed to suggest today that it's done.
Yeah.
That's probably, and I certainly would rely on that. That's probably a little updated position of what I had. It had been suggested to me that, hey, don't think that's 100% done yet, because it's a different scenario than the one we just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think if he really wanted to come back, I think Michigan State would welcome him back. He says, I'll read a quote again from Jim Comparoni's piece taken from the Tim Stout show. Mady is a tough one, Izzo said. He had a tough year, yet I'm telling you, he was a lot better player than all the abuse. Our centers took some abuse, some of it rightfully so. Some of it we have to take some blame on, not getting it in there and things, meaning post touches. Mady, like a Foster lawyer, will be a guy that will leave here in great graces. He's going to graduate. He's going to accomplish some things, and yet some of me is sad on Mady leaving because I think he was progressing as a sophomore. He actually means junior.
Yeah.
He met last year. And then his junior year, he did not have as good a year. So we are going to get him where he wants to get. And then specifically, he mentioned Mady looking at some schools like Washington, Cal, and Colorado. I think he's got visits set to those schools. They're also talking about San Diego State, and he said he's trying to help them. Those are all really good options. I would kind of hate to see Washington because that means he'd be a Big Ten opponent next year. But yeah, and that all lines up with what had been out there, that he was looking west. I'm a little bit surprised that there's no Utah schools in that mix, given that's where he went to prep school. That's where his mentor is, his guardian in the U.S. But yeah, all of that, all the things he said track with what I had heard, that nobody's angry about this. They all love him. I do still think they would welcome him back, but I think that there's probably been a determination that he would like an opportunity to play a bit bigger role than he would at Michigan State. Because honestly, looking at those schools, it isn't an NIL play. I can tell you that.
Yeah, right.
He isn't gonna make more at any of those places than he would make at Michigan State. So this is obviously something basketball oriented.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty clear.
Well, and the way you look at it is, you say, by having more opportunities, he can highlight his game, and then he can maybe the next level, he's going to garner more than he would be staying at Michigan State, even though this 1 year he'd make more NIL. And those are calculations.
Absolutely.
And, bet on yourself, or whatever.
Yeah, and look, he's going to get NIL wherever he goes, or the equivalent thereof. He's a foreign player. There'll be workarounds, but they'll get it done. I would be surprised if there wasn't still a good level of activity from the Michigan State community related to his foundation. I think that'll be encouraged, and you should, if you have the resources to do so. Still a very, very worthwhile cause. We've obviously had Mady on a couple times here talking about it. So, he's still trying to do things with that, and I think that'll continue. But you're right. The way I would read it is it's a little bit of a gamble, betting on himself to prove enough to maybe get a good overseas opportunity,
right,
to play professionally for a while. I think that's what it is.
Absolutely. Well, I guess that kind of brings it around to our new sponsor, the Christian Brothers Automotive. The one thing you don't want to gamble on is your car, and make sure it's in good running condition. And so they have a number of franchises in Grand Rapids. It's obviously a fantastic automotive place. We have all our car work done on them because they are honest mechanics. So it's kind of nice. But they have a spring special for if you're in the Grand Rapids area. which includes a full synthetic oil change, tire rotation, battery test, courtesy inspection. I can't tell you how many times my foster son says he's checking a car, they get up on the lift and there's coolant leaking or something like that, so people are not aware of. It's actually going to be the special is only $59.99 for listeners of the show. So all you have to do when you visit is say hoops, and that will get you the discount of what is normally a $99.99 service. So you can check that out at Christian Brothers Automotive to find a location near you. So let's talk about the portal ins, or the potential ones. We talked about 2 before, so let's go over those first, and then we'll go through the new names.
Okay, so maybe before we turn to the portal, just real quickly, one other interesting bit of information and I want to credit him fully, that Jim Comparoni mentioned today, taken again from Izzo's appearance on the Tim Stout show. That's why I'm speaking about it, because this is kind of public. Right. Izzo said he has talked to some people about the assistant coaching position that's vacant, but he's not going to really focus on that until after portal entry is closed. So he doesn't anticipate turning to that in earnest until May 1st and afterward, obviously. I think many of the names that we discussed here, so Sadie Washington, Tum Tum Nairn, people like that are still very viable and I would expect are among those 5. Chris Fowler are among those people that we discussed. I do have to say, I'm of the impression that I don't know that John Borovich is likely to move into that position. I had thought that might be sort of an automatic, and when it first became a possibility, and now I'm of the opinion it probably doesn't go that way. So that's where we're at. I had also mentioned here that there was a possibility that there would be a second opening on Michigan State staff. There hasn't been any movement on that front, and my conclusion, at least for now, always subject to change, but at least for now, is I would expect the other 2 assistants, Doug Wojcik and Thomas Kelly, as of now, to be back next year. So that's that. So I think we're talking about one spot,
yeah, which may change the calculation of who you hire as well.
It absolutely does, and I think that's a very on point observation. And I'll let others conclude what they wish to conclude about the meaning of that. But in any event, so turning to the portal, Michigan State had their first portal visitor of this period over the weekend. That was Frankie Fidler, who's a guy we've talked about, 6'6", 6'7" guard from Omaha, what used to be Nebraska at Omaha, but now it's just Omaha. Big time wing player, and exactly the kind of profile that Izzo had talked about wanting to add, a wing with size who can shoot it. He's not been a great shooter to date from 3, but he's a good one, 35% and change from 3 last year. But the things you like about him are his size and his overall offensive versatility. I mean, this is a kid who averaged 8 free throw attempts a game.
He's mixing
last
it
year,
up.
so he's getting to the rim. He's got a mid-range game. He was a good rebounder, over 6 a game, I believe, last year. Defense, it's hard to tell from what's out there, and I'll admit I didn't watch Omaha play last year, but I have to think at a minimum they believe that his size would give him a chance to match up against bigger wings, maybe better than what they had available to them a year ago. So he took the visit, and just to recap, his final 4 schools in this thing were Nebraska, Creighton, Wisconsin, Michigan State. Nebraska and Creighton are obviously home state schools. He's got a high school teammate, Chucky Hepburn, who plays at Wisconsin, and then Michigan State is the 4th school. The general perception had been going into last weekend, Wisconsin probably had the edge, but the word seems to be very strong that he had a great visit to Michigan State, and that might have tipped the scales. We'll see. I mean, there's been no definitive announcement, deadline, nothing like that. I imagine that it probably isn't likely to go too much longer, but I think there's reason for optimism on the Michigan State side with regard to Frankie Fidler. So that's the first guy. Now today, giving Jim his due, his credit, and I will just, this is a pitch for, I'm not on the staff at Spartan Mag. This is just an honest recommendation. If you're after really good information as early as it's available to get it, there are a few places better than that site for getting that kind of info. And Jim was the guy who broke this, that Trey Townsend, the 6'6" power forward from, well, I'm calling him power forward, from Oakland, who had a great regular season. He was Horizon Player of the Year, had 2 great NCAA tournament games for them in their run, is going to be taking a visit to Michigan State on Tuesday. Now, why is that interesting? Well, when he first hit the portal, and even a bit before that, it was kind of assumed in a lot of quarters that Michigan State would be a very likely landing spot for him. But that seemed to shift.
Yeah.
Michigan State was not among his announced visitors, and I happen to know, not guessing, that when he hit the portal, they showed real interest. I mean, this was not, people disconnecting what the interest level was. They were serious, but they weren't on his early visits list. He actually did a visit over the weekend to Michigan. And then it was yesterday or the day before, either Monday or Tuesday, he announced some other schools. I think Ohio State, maybe Houston. Can't recall off the top of my head who else, but there were a few other schools that he indicated he was likely to visit. And then today, Michigan State's back on the radar. So what does that mean? My understanding is this. I think initially there was a desire on the player's part to be interested in places that would give him a shot to play on the wing.
Okay.
He wasn't a wing at Oakland. I don't think he's a wing. I haven't talked or heard from anybody I would consider credible who believes he's a wing. Why do I say that? Well, he played power forward at Oakland, and he was in a system where he was kind of hidden defensively because they played a junk zone for his entire career there. So he hasn't really had to play a lot of man defense anyway. At the 4, the challenges you face as a wing are another level entirely on top of that. My understanding was Michigan State had an interest in him as a 4. And so conceivably, what that would mean is you could have a starting lineup that would have Trey Townsend as a 4 and Xavier Booker starting as a 5. Now, there would still likely be opportunities for Book to play the 4 as well. It wouldn't be like he'd exclusively be a 5, but that would be a setup that makes sense. You're not going to add Trey Townsend to be a reserve.
No.
And you're not going to take somebody to push Xavier Booker out to the portal
definitely not,
if you're Michigan State, right? So it's really the only way that kind of addition works. But that was my understanding as to what they were interested in doing. I'd also keep in mind, Michigan State has not publicly, nor have I heard of any other even semi-credible rumors otherwise, they haven't expressed any interest in a 5-man in the portal yet. So to me, certain things are being telegraphed here. But again, I don't think Michigan State saw him as a wing. So initially, that's why there was a disconnect. There's a poster on the Spartan Mag board late last week who I know is tapped into the same circles that Trey Townsend comes from, like grassroots AAU circles, because Trey Townsend was not playing for the family. He wasn't a Nike kid, any of that. But anyway, this individual had mentioned that Michigan State was serious about him, but I don't think they're going to get him. And that my understanding is it had to do with perception of position. Now the fact is that he's coming to Michigan State for a visit on Tuesday. It suggests to me that maybe there's been a meeting of the minds on that stuff. And I don't think that meeting of the minds means that Michigan State's changed the way that it sees him. I think it's maybe the kid understands, hey, this is actually a pretty good opportunity, and I'm playing the 4. I don't fault him. I think he's probably thinking in terms of pro aspirations. Anyway, so I think there's reason for renewed optimism on that front. And Trey Townsend can play. There are questions about him, but the things he does well, he does really well.
Do you think then that means that there's a reasonable chance to expect to have, we've always seen Booker as a 4. Do you think there's a good chance that he is at least comfortable and that the staff is also envisioning him playing the 5 more this next season coming up?
That has to be,
Yeah.
Because there's no way. And we're going to talk about another 4-man that they've expressed interest in a minute. There's no way that you're going to bring in somebody just to back up Xavier Booker.
Well, not certainly Townsend.
And
Right.
And there's no way that you're going to bring in somebody and say, well, Xavier, it's been nice knowing you, but, if you want to hang around, that's great, but we're bringing in this guy at your spot. No, that's not realistic, in my opinion, at least. So I have to believe that there's a meeting of the minds there with him. And again, let's also understand, if that's the way it is, if Trey Townsend comes in, let's just use him as an example, he's probably at most a 30-minute-a-night guy. So there's still playing time available for Xavier Booker at the 4. Right. It's not like he's exclusively going to be a 5, but I'll tell you what, there's every reason in my opinion, the more you look at this, the more you think about it, that his professional future quite possibly is as a 5-man.
Mm-hmm.
And he can do, offensively, he can do all the same things that Michigan State, if you think about it, all it will mean, primarily that 4-5 designation, is about defensive responsibilities, right? Offensively, Trey Townsend is a decent shooter from 3, but low volume. I don't think that's going to change dramatically. He's not going to turn to Joey Hauser overnight. His strength is as a low post player offensively. So he will be the guy that's posting up. And I think they'll be looking to use Book pretty much the same way they did when he played this year, in a lot of pick and pop, using him as a screen setter up top, hopefully getting some rim dive action out of him too. But I think it's not going to be a difference for him in terms of how he plays. Now, defensively, Book's going to have to make some adjustments physically. Yeah. He's got to continue to get stronger. But I'll tell you what, I saw what I felt was real progress from him over the course of this season. And I think with another good offseason, adding some good weight, continuing to improve his understanding as to what his responsibilities are, I actually think he can be a plus defensive player. Now, is he big enough to handle, and strong enough to handle 270-pound guys on the block? Well, that may be an issue. But I love his length, and I made this point today on the message board. MSU's last year's team had a lot of guys. Madi Sissoko had great wingspan. Carson Cooper's got great wingspan. But Xavier Booker's wingspan plays.
Yeah.
It plays in a way that they haven't had since at least Marcus Bingham left. And so I think he can give you help there as a rim protector too. So I think it can work. It's not foolproof. That combination of those two guys starting in those roles, it doesn't come without any questions. But I think it could work. And offensively, I think it could be very good.
Yeah. Well, we'll kind of have to wait and see how things play out, obviously. Before we go further, I just want to remind you that if you need your gutters looked at, there's no better place than Brothers Adjust Your Gutters. The Brothers can take care of you whether on the east side or the west side of the state. It is spring. There's plenty of water running around. You maybe have sticks or leaves that built up in your gutters. You need those cleaned out. Maybe you want some leaf guards so you don't have to go up there and clean them out yourself. You can talk to the guys there. They'll give you 10% off. You mentioned Final Four. You can find the contact information at the Final Fours on thescheduler.com/support. There you can get links to get estimates. And, whether it's replacing, cleaning out, repairing, or whatever it is, residential, commercial, they can do whatever job is, big or small. Even if it's just like one section of gutter, just a downspout, they can certainly take care of it. And I've had tons of people, listeners who've contacted me, thanking us for the recommendation, and they've had great success with the Brothers. So now those are the ones we've talked about in the past. Who are the new names that we're seeing bandied about? And obviously, we have not heard the the sound of, fives coming in. So we're pretty much looking at threes and fours, I think.
Yeah. And what today makes clear is something that's been ongoing on social media, on some of the fan sites, message boards, etc., especially over the last several days. This notion that just because you're not seeing it made public in the media, that means that Tom Izzo and his staff are sitting on their hands and they're not looking to add somebody. Well, he confirmed today on Stout's show that he's got room for 1 or 2 additions, and they're intent on trying to add a player or players. I every time this came up, my response to it was, well, it's April 12th, or it's April 14th, or today it's April 17th. And today there have been several more names that have come out as having Michigan State interest, and presumably vice versa to one extent or another. What's the lesson for us to learn in this? It takes a while to sort out.
Yeah.
Michigan State is not a program that trumpets this stuff the way others do. There's probably at least some of our listeners are familiar with the Twitter figure Trilly Donovan. Not Billy Donovan, Trilly Donovan. Trilly Donovan is someone who has kept their identity opaque, which I respect, but and applaud him for. It's a wise move. Yeah. But clearly is someone who is plugged in. I think the assumption has been that it's someone who's in the college basketball media and wants to feel free to put rumor stuff out there in a way that they really can't, their day gig, but that hasn't been verified. It could be someone who's in AAU circles, who knows. Anyway, great resource and gets much, much, much more right than he does wrong. But in response to this Frankie Fidler recruitment, he admitted he doesn't talk to anybody at Michigan State. And that's kind of been the way Michigan State's always operated under Tom Izzo. As I say, there are programs that will talk to anybody and put their business on the street willingly because they think that's the right way to operate. That, just doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, just make sure they spell the name right. Right? That is not Michigan State's MO, never has been. So you cannot ever assume that just because you're not reading Michigan State constantly in connection with a wide, first of all, they're never going to make offers to 30 guys. That's never going to be their MO. Right. But even considering that, don't assume that you know what's going on or have a complete understanding based on what's being made public. And also understand that the portal is available for players to jump into right up until the end of the month. So even as we sit here tonight on April 17th, we don't know, as people on the outside of this stuff, who's in the portal, who's going to be in the portal. There's still a lot of time to unfold, and guaranteed there will be more guys. I think it was Jeff Goodman mentioned the other day that there are going to be a lot more guys that come in over the last 2 weeks because there are players that are waiting for their final NIL payment to come through
before they leave,
that they were contracted for before they leave. Yeah. So believe it, there will be more names. And every day until we hit the deadline, there will be more names. Now, one other thing for listeners to consider, safely assume that Michigan State's probably got a reasonably good idea of who else is coming or is at least likely to come into the portal that hasn't announced yet. So that too might be playing into this, but regardless, we've got some more names. So one, and this is one I think a lot of people would be happy with, based on what he's done to date in his career. Ryan Conwell, who's a 6'4" guard from Indiana State. Now, as I think at least some of our listeners know, Indiana State lost their coach. Josh Schertz has gone to St. Louis. His entire starting five hit the portal, but they're not all going with him. Some of them are going to end up at St. Louis. I think their big center, Robbie Avila, is likely to end up at St. Louis. He may get another guy or two, but one of their players, Jason Kent, played very well against Michigan State last December. He is already committed to Texas, and it doesn't look like Conwell is likely to go to St. Louis either. So here's a little bit of data on Conwell. He played his freshman year at South Florida for Brian Gregory, who I think a lot of our listeners know has a close relationship with Tom Izzo, was on the staff here for a long time, blah, blah, blah. So there's a connection there. He started 21 games as a freshman for BG. Then he transferred last year to Indiana State. And at Indiana State, for a very good team, he averaged 16.6 points a game, shot 41% from three. And when they played Michigan State, he scored 16, so pretty much his seasonal average. Was 5 for 11 from the floor, including 3 of 6 from three-point range. So he did it in playing the best team they probably faced all year. I think that's safe to assume.
Yeah, I think so.
In Michigan State. And, I think they played Alabama early, so whatever, one of the two best teams. And played very well. That's a good sign, and he had a great season. He's a little shorter at 6'4" than I think their ideal. I think their intention is to get a true bigger wing. He's not quite that. But Ryan Conwell can play. One other note that I think is important here, a reason to kind of keep your eye on him. He's from Indianapolis. He played at Indianapolis Pike High School. And I think we've discussed this here before, but at the risk of reiterating it, I'm going to do it anyway. If you look over the history of Michigan State's activity with transfers, so not just this limited portal era, but even long before that, it's almost always either guys they recruited previously, so Mike Chappelle would fit that mold, Joey Hauser would fit that mold, and if it's not that, it's guys who were in their normal recruiting territory, so the upper Midwest, that they can get a pretty good feel on by virtue of relationships they have with high school coaches, AAU coaches, et cetera, in their recruiting turf. Yeah. Conwell would fit that. As an Indianapolis kid, he is right down the middle of historically the kinds of guys in terms of his background that Michigan State has added via transfer. Yeah. So just worth keeping that in mind.
I think that sort of points out what we've talked about before with other previous transfers, that there's the established relationship, like you said, through previous commit, but that I think Michigan State is, I don't know, maybe more careful is the wrong word, but I'll say it. Maybe they are more careful in trying to get a feel for the type of person and type of player that they are 100%. Off the court, and I think some teams are less concerned about that. They're more, looking at stats, and then they have the situation where they take off partway through the season and it may not work out as well. So I think they're just more careful about that, which you can be if you're only taking one or two, a year, maybe.
100%. I think it's exactly right. And, I think that's why when you're recruiting guys, when you're choosing to recruit transfers who are from an area where you have a deep familiarity with people in the basketball community, it's much more realistic, even in a shorter time frame, which the portal forces you into, to get what you feel is a good read on a kid, right? So like somebody like Aaron Harris, they didn't recruit him out of high school, but he was an Indianapolis kid. They had good reports on him. They had background on him from people they trusted. And then they decided to add him as a transfer because they figured out that he fit. You're absolutely right. They're not running the AAU All-Stars kind of operation right here, where you're just grabbing guys because they seem to kind of fit based on some stats and some physical tools. And that's it. Izzo made a comment today on Stout Show where he said, he's been just spending endless amounts of time watching tape on guys. And he said he's seeing a lot of guys who a lot of people want to tell him can play. Yeah. And he's seeing something different. So that's a basketball aspect that, you'll see these lists, and I have no idea why anybody would put a lot of stock into it beyond some obvious names. But, I saw one of the recruiting coverage sites today, just today, had a list of the top 100 portal players in this cycle. I think Tom Izzo's telling you he doesn't give two shits about that list. Like Fidler is not like a top 30 or 40 guy on those lists, but Michigan State clearly wants him. They've identified him as a guy they think can fit and help, right? So he doesn't care. And I'll guarantee you, Izzo would dissect a lot of those guys in that top 20 and say, yeah, this is why I don't want this guy. And it's a lot of basketball reasons, and it could also be some non-basketball reasons that would relate to fit. But in any event, at least the stuff on the surface, the shooting ability, and to a little extent the size, but especially the background, Ryan Conwell would be a name to kind of keep on your radar.
Yeah. And you've already faced him, so you definitely have as much,
right.
experience.
They saw him play.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. So there's at least a little bit of familiarity. Another name, Kobe Bray, 6'6", 210-pounder from Dayton. Very interesting name, but I will temper this one by saying he entered the portal, I think it was yesterday. He's got the world coming at him. I mean, when you look at the list he had of schools that have contacted him, it's a who's who. And it's interesting because his numbers, at least his counting numbers, are not eye-popping. He averaged 11 points a game, 3.8 rebounds a game. Most of that time was spent coming off the bench. Now, he was Atlantic 10 Sixth Man of the Year twice. So he's obviously a key guy, but those are not overwhelming. Some of these guys, Frankie Fidler was a 20-point-a-game scorer, right? Now, he played at 11, and we just mentioned Conwell, 17 a game. They played at schools that are a little bit leveled down from where Dayton is, so that's part of it. But I think Kobe Bray is a guy that people are extrapolating what he could be, primarily because of the shooting. The size at 6'6" is nice, too, but this guy shot 49.8% from three. He hit 100 of 201 shots. So that is a shooter. Yeah. When Tom Izzo earlier in the portal said, we want to add a wing with size who can really shoot it, well, Kobe Bray is both of those things. So, I mean, this is a guy who's an elite shooter. Other schools besides Michigan State, and he's a product of New York City, comes out of the Bronx. Kentucky, Wisconsin, UConn. I want to say I saw Kansas on the list, but it's kind of a who's
might
who.
As well at that point.
So I don't know where he would fit in. And by the way, I have a feeling if they get a positive decision from Fidler, I'm going to guess that kind of shuts it down on these wings.
Yeah.
So some of these guys we're talking about, I think, are if Fidler doesn't commit to Michigan State. But Kobe Bray is going to be a tough pull for anybody just because he could pretty much choose the school at this point. But definitely somebody Michigan State's been interested in and is worth mentioning. Another name I'll bring back up, we talked about the last time, Javon Small, 6'3" guard from Indiana who played at Oklahoma State, 15 points a game, almost 5 rebounds a game, 4 assists per game, shot 37% from three. He's only 6'3". And so I have my doubts. Early in that one, Michigan State was mentioned prominently, but Jim's got him on his list. I'm not sure if he's likely to me. And I think we talked about this, right?
If Jaden doesn't stick around, then maybe you have
exactly,
right.
Exactly. And speaking of that, I should mention that the scuttlebutt on Jaden Akins is that he has indicated to the coaching staff that he intends to come back, but there was also a suggestion that he wanted to enter the portal just to see what was out there. And he was told by Michigan State, if you do that, we might have to move on because we wouldn't know that you're back. So you haven't heard anything about him entering the portal. And I think about a week or two ago, it was seen as a high probability, and it hasn't happened. I'm inclined to think it probably doesn't happen. You never know for sure. We got 2 weeks left, but I think they feel pretty good about him coming back. And with Small, I just can't see him making sense for Michigan State really, unless a Jaden Akins were to leave, and then you are looking for that kind of player. And he's a good player. It's just I don't think the fit is perfect. So one other wing-ish type player, which we talked about before, Keyshawn Hall, who's a 6'7", 230-pounder out of George Mason, started at UNLV. He's from Cleveland originally, so he fits that mold. But this one, This one's wild because he's got some good numbers. I mean, Hall was a productive player last year. Second team all A10 players, 16.6 points, 8 rebounds a game, averaged 5 free throws per game. So, he's produced.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. But this is a kid who, counting his first 2 years of college, so he'll be going to another school next year.
Yeah.
Going back to his freshman year of high school, 7 schools in 7 years. Does not sound like a Tom Izzo fit. Interestingly, he announced a Final Four late last week, and Michigan State was in it, along with USC, Arkansas, and Central Florida. My understanding is Michigan State's not actively recruiting him. Now, maybe that's changed, or maybe my information is not 100% accurate, but I feel like it probably is. And other people have suggested that too, by the way. Other media figures have said Michigan State's not really active there. He's a kid with talent, but the 7 schools in 7 years thing, that would be a real shift.
Yeah, sounds like a flight risk.
Yeah. And you just have to wonder about what you were talking about fit, right? Like, how does that kind of kid really fit with Tom Izzo's thing? Okay, so that takes care of the perimeter players. And again, we're recording this on April 17th. There will be more guys who enter the portal, so there's no guarantee that this list is complete. Other names could surface if Michigan State doesn't land the guy they want. Right. But there was another interesting one that's worth mentioning who's not a wing. It's a guy named Matt Cross, who's a 6'7", 230-pound power forward who played at UMass last year. Now, he was a first-team Atlantic 10 player, averaged 15 points and a little over 8 rebounds a game at UMass. So A10, pretty good competition level. Sub-Big Ten, but pretty good. If you can produce at that level in the A10, you're a first-team A10 guy, you can play in the Big Ten. He shot 33% from 3, averaged maybe a little under 3 attempts per game. So not great stretchability, but a little bit there. Mm-hmm. And he's got a lot of people after him too. He just entered the portal yesterday. But the fact that Michigan State has made contact with him, and again, no contact with 5s, tells me something. When you put this in combination with the Trey Townsend thing, if they're going to add a front court player, right now I would be betting that it is much, much more likely to be a 4-man than a 5. And that probably means Xavier Booker is getting 5 minutes. It almost has to.
No, I think there's no question about that, which is interesting too, because I think that probably puts into question, what Cooper and Kohler want to do too, because right?
Absolutely.
I mean, so there's no guarantee they'll be around.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think if this happens, if they add a 4-man, and this is just consider it an informed opinion, but not a lock. If that happens, I'm going to bet that Jackson Kohler transfers. I think the only way Jackson Kohler transfers is if doesn't transfer rather, is if their front court stays intact where it is right now. Meaning that he and Carson Cooper are competing for the starting 5 spot, with Jesse McCullough kind of figuring in there as well as a freshman. But that's what I would bet on personally. I have heard nothing suggesting that Carson Cooper would be, as you put it, a flight risk. And it makes sense. Carson Cooper is a Michigan kid. He's from Jackson, and I also think that if you're putting someone else, let's say you're putting Book there as a starting 5, I think Carson Cooper is more likely to be the guy who gets the bulk of the reserve minutes. Why? Because he's a proven defensive player, at least at a higher level than the other options would be. And we know what Izzo tends to default to. So to me, that's the more likely outcome. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because if they add guys, that doesn't mean the dominoes totally stop falling.
Right. All right. Well, just a quick reminder too, as we'll wrap things up here. Check out the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids if you need your windows cleaned. It is spring. It is time to start seeing those birds outside and actually let the sunlight in now that the sun has reemerged from winter in Michigan. So if you're in the Grand Rapids area, there's no better place to contact than the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They can take care of all your needs for your home, and they will also even power wash your house if you need it as well. So check out them on the support page again at tiffknots.com/support. You can get 15% off if you mention Final Four when getting your estimate. And finally, Nudge Printing, the longtime sponsor for the show, who provides all our gifts and prizes and they have many schools. In fact, probably most of the schools on their list have players that are in the transfer portal, I would imagine at this point.
Safe bet.
Yes. So all the directional schools, all the schools in Michigan outside of the University of Michigan. So Gabe Brittany have some taste, we'll say. You can get gear from all those schools. So if you've got a mixed family, or you got some other people in your life you want to get some stuff for, Nudge Printing is the way to go. High quality garments. They also have big wall stickers if you want, stickers for your computer. I got some on mine right now. They got all kinds of cool stuff. So check them out at nudgeprinting.com. You get 20% off if you type in Final Four as one word at checkout. So again, don't forget, if you want to get an invite for this in-person dinner we're having this summer at some point, make sure you head over to our support page. You can sign up to be a recurring supporter either through Patreon or Substack. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.